The boy who fooled death 7 times and changed medicine forever. Let me tell you a story that sounds made up, but it ain't. It starts with a coffin, not a metaphor, not a symbol. An actual coffin, pine wood, half-built, leaning against a barn wall, waiting. And inside that barn, a 12-year-old boy, laughing. His name was Milo Vern. And if you asked anyone in the village of Welwick back then, they'd tell you the same thing. That boy was cursed. But they didn't know the half of it. See, Milo didn't just cheat death once, not twice, 7 times. And every single time he did, the world learned something new, not about miracles, but about medicine. They called him lucky. He called it just stubborn. Now, before you go thinking this is a fairy tale, let's be clear. This wasn't magic. This was mud, blood, needles, and nerves. And it starts in the winter of 1811. Milo was born during a snowstorm that buried half the county. His mother died giving birth. His father, a wheelwright with more debts than teeth, named him after the midwife's brother, who'd also died that week. Milo didn't cry. Didn't even blink. The midwife said it was a bad sign. By the time he turned 5, he'd already been bitten by a rabid dog, fallen into a frozen river, and eaten wild mushrooms that nearly stopped his heart. And yet, there he was, alive, walking, breathing, smiling with crooked teeth. The town doctor, old Harold Trask, took an interest in him, said, either he's blessed or death's just too bored to take him properly. When Milo turned 7, he got sick again, real sick. Fever so high it warped the spoon in his mouth. They laid him in the barn and lit candles, and then he got up. Just sat up and said, I think I need water. No damage. No memory of the fever. That was number 4. By 9, he'd survived a lightning strike. By 10, he was run over by a supply cart, broke both legs, ribs, and a collarbone. The town carpenter started building that coffin, just in case, but it never got used. The doctor asked to study him, his blood, his heart, his bones. Milo said, only if you pay me. And the doctor laughed so hard, he actually agreed. Now here's where things get strange. Milo wasn't just surviving, he was noticing things. He started asking questions. Why do we cut people to bleed when they're already weak? Why do we burn fevers out when that makes the skin break? Why do you give the same medicine to people with different sicknesses? Trask didn't have answers, none that satisfied Milo anyway. So the boy started experimenting, not in some lab. In the dirt, on pigs, on himself. He'd prick his finger, watch the blood clot, count how long it took. He'd eat different roots, track how long his stomach churned. He tested cold water, hot stones, honey, vinegar, ash. Once he even let a hornet sting him on purpose, then tried 12 ways to stop the swelling. Why would you do that? A farm girl asked him once, horrified. He shrugged and said, somebody has to find out what works. Word started spreading. People stopped calling him cursed. They started calling him the healer's shadow. By 13, he'd helped stitch a man's arm after a saw accident. At 14, he figured out how to treat a soldier's infected wound with a salve made from stale beer and moss, and saved the man's leg. Old Trask couldn't believe it. You should be my apprentice, he said. I thought I already was, Milo replied. The world was changing fast. Wars were burning across the sea. New machines were arriving in cities, steam, iron, industry. But out in the fields of Welwick, a boy was quietly reinventing medicine. And then came number 7, the one that should have killed him for real. It started with a cough. Harmless at first. Then came the fever, the shaking, the blood. Consumption, they called it, or red rot. Back then, it was a death sentence. Milo was 17, strong, clever. But this was different. Trask tried everything, leeches, smoke, vinegar compresses. Nothing worked. Milo wasted away. By the third week, he couldn't stand, could barely talk. His skin turned gray, eyes sunken. Everyone came to say goodbye, even the carpenter. Brought the coffin back out, dusted it off. Milo looked at it, weak as he was, and whispered, "Too small." Those were supposed to be his last words. They buried him. Not 6 feet under, just shallow. Frozen ground wouldn't let them dig far. But the next morning, the coffin was empty, and there were bloody handprints in the snow, leading to the healer's shack. He'd woken up, clawed his way out, collapsed right outside Trask's door. When the doctor found him, Milo was barely breathing, his body cold, bones sharp under thin skin, but he was alive. And in his pocket, a folded note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Burn the lungs of the sick, not the body. Boil herbs in sealed pots. Cover your mouth." That note became legend, because 5 years later, when the red rot swept through the cities again, it saved thousands. Doctors started using face cloths soaked in vinegar, isolating patients, boiling water to clean wounds, and they credited it to the boy who fooled death 7 times. But Milo, he just wanted to sleep. After the 7th time, the town stopped waiting for Milo to die. Instead, they started watching what he'd do next. He didn't return to normal life. He couldn't. His lungs were still damaged. His legs barely carried him. But something about him had changed, not just in his body, but in his eyes. He'd seen something out there. Wherever he'd gone between life and death, he'd brought back more than just breath. He'd brought back focus. Old Trask said it best. "He's got death's blueprint under his skin now." And it was true. Milo wasn't afraid anymore. Not of sickness, not of pain, not of being wrong. What scared him now was how little the world cared about learning. He left Welwick in the spring of 1818. No fanfare, no goodbyes, just a satchel full of herbs, ink, and notes, and a destination. Camden, a port city, bigger, meaner, with 2 hospitals and a university where the elite studied medicine while ignoring the people dying in the alleys outside. Milo didn't go to class. He went straight to the morgue. He asked to observe. They laughed, so he bribed the night porter with a bottle of gin and waited until the staff was gone. What he found shocked him. Bodies stored like meat, infection untreated, tools unwashed between dissections, and doctors who spoke in Latin but didn't know what a gangrenous wound looked like up close. Milo started keeping a journal. Not just notes, observations. What killed fast, what killed slow, what smells meant rot, what colors meant the blood was lying. He sketched lungs, hearts, livers, tumors. He cataloged pus by thickness, measured bruises by the minute. It was horrifying. It was brilliant. He didn't sleep much. He didn't need to. He was chasing something now. Something even death hadn't shown him. Truth. One night, a young surgeon named Halbridge caught him. "What the hell are you doing in here?" the man barked. "Studying what your professors pretend to understand," Milo answered calmly. Instead of reporting him, Halbridge pulled up a chair. "You really clawed out of a coffin?" Milo didn't blink. "You want to check for scratch marks?" After that, Halbridge brought him gloves, took him into back rooms, gave him access to the unacceptable cases, the ones no student wanted to touch. And those were exactly the ones Milo wanted most. He started publishing anonymously, short pieces, shorter titles. On the efficacy of boiled bandages, the color of dying eyes, the importance of sterilization in midwinter fevers. The professors scoffed, called the author a rural fantasist. But on the docks, where sailors bled, in the slums, where women gave birth on floors, and in the alleyways, where rats and wounds lived side by side, his words were gospel. People started carrying his notes like charms. Midwives recited his lines like prayers. Some called him the grave scholar. Others, the bleeding pen. But no one knew who he really was, not until the strike. That summer, a fire broke out in the Camden wool factory. Dozens were pulled from the ruins, burned, broken, screaming. The hospital was overwhelmed. The young surgeons panicked. Halbridge froze. And then Milo walked in. No coat, no credentials, just a voice like iron. "You," he said, pointing at a nurse, "start boiling water. Now. You," to a surgeon, "cut cloth into strips. We need pressure pads. You," to Halbridge, "hold that man's chest open. We're draining the fluid or he dies in 12 minutes. And they did it. Not because he had power, because he had certainty. 14 hours later, 19 people were still alive that would have otherwise been dead. And Halbridge told the head of the hospital the truth. It was a boy from Welwick. No schooling. But he's seen death more than anyone in this building. The board summoned him. A room full of gray-haired men in velvet robes. They asked where he studied. He said, "In barns, in pits, in burning houses and freezing rivers, under corpses and inside fevers." They asked who taught him. He said, "Pain." They laughed. He didn't. They denied him entry, called him dangerous, unorthodox. Milo didn't argue. He walked out, returned to the slums, and wrote everything down. Everything they refused to hear. And for the first time, he signed his name. Milo Vern. Born 1801, died 1818, almost. By the time Milo's name made it onto clinic walls and pamphlets, his face was already known across Camden. People started lining up outside his door, not patients with coins, but the ones no doctor wanted. People coughing blood, missing limbs, children with fever rashes, women carrying stillborn silence in their stomachs, begging for a second chance. Milo never turned them away, but he also never pretended to be a miracle. "I can't cheat death for you," he'd say, "but I can make him work harder than he planned." And that was enough. It was more than most had ever been given. He trained a small team, not medics, watchers, learners. He taught them not just to look at wounds, but to listen to breath, not just to wash hands, but to ask why they bled. He taught them how to question every certainty they'd been handed. He gave them no title, only a rule. Don't fix the body. Learn it. And they did. For 2 years, Milo's method spread underground. He called it gray medicine, the space between old myth and new science, and people were listening. But then, something changed. A sickness rolled through the southern quarter. Not fast, not fiery, but slow. It started with sleep. People slept too long, woke confused. Then came the weakness, the forgetfulness. Their eyes sank, muscles stopped responding. Then came the choking, not from fluid, from the mind. It didn't act like anything Milo had seen before. He ran tests, took notes, compared it to what he'd learned. It didn't match consumption or fever or poison. This one was new, and it spread. Dozens fell ill, then hundreds. No pattern. Rich and poor, old and young. It didn't care who you were, neither did Milo. He stayed in the sick ward for 11 days straight. Didn't sleep, barely ate. Carried children to fresh linens, wiped mouths, cleaned floors, changed compresses. His team begged him to stop, to rest. "You've cheated death too many times," Halbridge warned him. "He's watching now." "I'm counting on it," Milo replied. Then, on the 12th day, he collapsed. Not dramatically, just a quiet fall to the floor, like a coat dropped from a hook. They carried him to the back room, laid him on the table he'd once carved his own initials into. His breathing was shallow, pulse uneven. Halbridge leaned over him. "Can you hear me?" Milo's lips moved, barely. "You taking notes?" And then he laughed. Or maybe choked. It was hard to tell. The sickness had found its teacher, and for the first time, he didn't know how to fight it. He slept for 2 days. No movement. On the third, he woke up with a voice like cracked parchment. He didn't ask what day it was. He asked for ink. They gave him a slate instead. His hands couldn't grip yet. He scratched 5 words onto the stone. Cut hair. Wash behind ears. The staff stared at it. Then he scratched more. Check water near South Well. Watch for flies at night. They ran the tests and found it. The well water was contaminated. Not by rot or blood, by mold, rare, airborne. The mold was feeding into lungs, latching onto nerves, slowing the brain's signals until the body stopped remembering how to live. It wasn't poison, it was interruption. Milo's discovery led to immediate action. They shut off the well, boiled new water, heated rooms to force spores out, opened new windows in every ward. The sickness slowed, then stopped. Milo had done it again. But this time, he didn't walk out on his own. He had to be carried. He never fully recovered. His legs worked, barely. His voice stayed raspy, but his mind still sharp, sharper than ever. He wrote a book. It wasn't long, only 90 pages. But those 90 pages changed the world. It was called On the Resistance of the Living Body to Unnatural Interference. It wasn't just a medical text. It was a philosophy. He talked about death like a puzzle, illness like a message, the body like a city with its own traffic rules. He warned doctors not to fight nature, but to partner with it, to study, to respect it, to ask better questions, and to listen, not just to organs, to patients, to their pain, to what wasn't said. He ended the book with a single line. The body is not a war zone, it is a negotiation. They offered him medals, titles, even a professorship at Camden University. He turned them all down. He said, "I never needed a classroom to learn. Why would I need one to teach?" Instead, he opened a clinic in Welwick, the same barn he was almost buried behind. No sign, no fee, just a table, a cot, and a stack of slates for patients who couldn't speak. He died there, not suddenly, not dramatically, at peace, surrounded by notes, drawings, herbs, and the sound of quiet breathing. When Milo Vern died, no bells rang. No national mourning, no royal decree, just a cloudy sky over a barn and a quiet wind moving through the wheat. He was buried under an old oak tree behind the clinic, the same one he'd stared at as a child, thinking he'd never grow old enough to outlive it. No statue was raised, no plaque installed, just a pile of river stones and a wooden cross with one word carved into it: listen. That was Milo's gospel. He didn't teach people how to beat death, he taught them how to pay attention. And that, more than any tool or tincture or textbook, was what changed everything. 2 months after his funeral, someone broke into his clinic. Not to steal, to copy. They took his notes, hundreds of them, scrawled on paper, wood, walls, even the ceiling beams. Some didn't make sense. Others made too much. People started sharing them. Farmers, sailors, mothers, apprentices, not just doctors. Because Milo hadn't written for medicine. He'd written for the sick, the desperate, the ones who had nothing left but questions. And slowly, his ideas started showing up where they didn't belong. In universities, in surgical rooms, on ships, in back-alley birthing stations. A midwife in East Anglia stitched his diagrams into quilts. A field doctor in Prussia translated his salve instructions and used them on wounded soldiers. A girl in Marseille, who couldn't read, memorized his vinegar poultice recipe after someone recited it to her in a bakery line, and saved her brother's foot when no one else would help. The man became myth. But the myth was useful. Because it wasn't about what he did. It was about what he understood. That the body isn't an enemy. That healing isn't about control, it's about respect. That the sick aren't numbers, they're voices. And death isn't a punishment, it's a negotiator. Milo taught people to negotiate better. Years later, Camden University finally did put up a statue, bronze, modest, tucked in the garden behind the West Wing. It's not him in fine robes. It's a young boy with no shoes, kneeling beside a wounded dog, holding its paw and a jar of water. Most people walk past it, but those who stop, they'll see what's carved into the base. He died 7 times, and every time we got smarter. They say modern triage, that idea of treating based on urgency instead of wealth, came from Milo's notes. They say he was the first to describe cross-contamination years before germ theory took hold. Some believe he understood early immunity boosters, long before vaccination became a proper word. Historians argue if he really clawed out of a coffin. They debate how much of the legend was real. But what they can't deny is what came after. Because something shifted after Milo Vern. The sick stopped being shamed. The dying stopped being hidden. And healers started listening. One of his original notebooks ended up in the hands of a doctor named Lowell Brenner. Brenner went on to found the first clinic in the Southern Territories that didn't segregate patients by class. He credited the boy from Welwick. Another notebook was found decades later inside a rusted medical trunk in a war-torn trench. It had only one page intact. It said, "If the body speaks, don't interrupt. If it screams, answer. If it falls quiet, ask again." That one page changed how triage was handled in the field from then on. Because sometimes all it takes is a reminder written in a dead boy's hand. And so, the story doesn't end with Milo's death. It ends every time a student listens harder. Every time a surgeon washes twice. Every time a doctor asks why instead of how. Every time someone facing death buys just a few more minutes of life and uses them to ask one more question. That's how you fool death, not with tricks, but with curiosity, with patience, with truth. And if you're lucky, with a little bit of Milo Vern in your ear whispering, take notes, pay attention, and never stop asking what comes next. This ain't just a story, it's a warning. Next time you're scared of dying, ask yourself what Milo would have done. Then go do it before death figures out you're bluffing.